I created, as usual, the page for week 7, but I did something else that I'm going to use later this week and next week. That is to say, we're almost halfway through the semester and the week before the spring break, actually, and it's time we think, we talk about the final project. So the first step in the right direction that I took was to add to the syllabus. Here is the syllabus, and that's the part about the final project. There are guidelines, there are suggestions. One thing that was missing was a list of suggested films, because essentially the final project would be a paper about a gangster movie, a mafia movie, where you would show that you can execute the same kind of analysis, discussion of themes that you've done in class with me or in the assignments. As opposed to the assignments, it's up to you to decide the theme or themes you want to emphasize, still in line with the class, right? But it's up to you to pick a film that is not on our list, right? So you use the films we've done in class as an example, as a model, and as I added to the guidelines, it would be absolutely useful, helpful to connect the discussion of the film you've picked for your final paper with one or more of the films we've done in class, or compare, as long as there is a strong reason for a comparison. It's not just something academic. But I put together a short list of 8 or 10 films that I think would be easier to work on. You're not limited to this list. However, I would recommend, if you're not picking a title from this list, that you simply run the idea that you have in mind by me, sending me the title. Perhaps it would be useful for me if you added a couple of lines why you want to do this. And instead of a film, clearly a film from this list, it would be acceptable to work on The Sopranos, because they're so compatible with what we're doing. Just make your project manageable. If you're working on The Sopranos, then work on a smaller group of episodes or a character through a group of episodes. Don't try to work the entire series into your paper, because you would end up writing something that is too generic. Whereas the approach we emphasize is start from the bottom, start from the scenes, start from the story, the characters, the visuals in the film, and work your way up to the treatment of the theme. Okay, so keep that in mind. Yes, The Sopranos would be acceptable, but I would pick a great episode or a small group of episodes, which could be from different seasons, right? Meaning, if you want to, let's say, build your paper on a character, then you might pick 3 moments in the development of the characters through different seasons that mark crucial points in the narrative. Okay. Today we're going to do something different. Usually on Tuesdays we talk about a text, on Thursdays we talk about a film, but this time we're finally aligned. We're working on the novel by Mario Puzo, but we're also introducing The Godfather. So today and Thursday I'm going to mix the text and the film. Starting with an activity. I'll show you briefly the notes that I posted on The Godfather, still under week 7 in the same page. I'm going to show you the famous initial sequence of The Godfather, which runs about 25 minutes. And then I want you working preferably in groups, but if you'd rather work individually, that's fine with me. I think it would be advantageous, since we're all here together, to exchange ideas. I want you to try and analyze the visuals and the contents of the initial sequence. Again, not the whole sequence, but try to find meaningful clues to the message, the themes communicated by the sequence, so that we can discuss your findings either at the end of this class, if there is time, or at the beginning of the next class. So, again, that was the list from the syllabus. You can look at the list yourself, and later I can tell you a few things about the various films. As I said, I intend to talk more about the project in the coming weeks. So keep in mind that under week 7, I posted once again the link to the PDF, so that during your activity, if you want to check the novel and how the scene, for example, with Amerigo Bonasera, the Undertaker, plays out, what is that the film is adding visually through the acting, through the movements of the characters on the scene, through the furniture, the objects, that would be great. And as I said, there is a section, the plot, the style, where I posted some general notes. I didn't do the work for you. And in fact, I have more notes about the style of the film, but I want to offer them now. I'll offer them on Thursday, because I want you to approach this with a fresh look. But if you have time, it's not a very long read. While you engage with the activity, you can go through these notes that talk about the representation of force and violence in the film, or how the film's approach to the narration of the life of criminals is different from other films in the same genre, including films like Little Caesar from 1931 or Scarface from 1932 that we have watched in class. And keep in mind, as usual, I produced PDFs. This time I had to split the PDF in two because the film is so long that I collected, actually there are 4,200 frames combined in those PDFs. But you don't have to go through the whole thing to find things that are useful. Let me just show you. Trying to see if it's possible to have a slide per page. Yeah. So I took frames while I was watching the film with a program that I have. I was capturing key frames, sometimes one per second, sometimes one every 3 seconds, with the captions as well. So just to show you the kind of observations that emerge when you look at these frames for a sequence. You wouldn't do it for the whole film unless you have some kind of obsession with it. But look at what happens at the beginning, right? You have the traditional, conventional dark frame that you find in a lot of films. Let me shut off the lights so you'll be able to see a few more details. Oh, sorry. No. Yep. To do everything. Okay. This must be this one. if I had practical skills, I wouldn't work as a professor, right? So you start with the traditional black frame, right? It's like setting the basis. But then you hear the voice of Amerigo Bonasera, the undertaker, who's there to ask for a favor from Don Vito Corleone on the day of his daughter's wedding. And only gradually the face of Amerigo comes through this big amount of darkness. But what's interesting here is what the film is not doing. That is to say, the film is not starting with the criminal protagonists. It's starting with a secondary character. And the second thing you start noticing through the sequence is that the secondary character, who's not a criminal, who's just there to ask for a favor, is more aggressive in the intonation of the voice, more agitated, the pace of the delivery of his lines, and his whole body is moving much more than Don Vito himself, who's sitting behind the desk, staying very still. And we can continue with the frames, even if we just look at some of them, right? You can see how the character is moving, and the camera is also zooming out, because eventually we'll see him and Don Vito. And then the shot will widen even farther, and we'll see that they're not alone. In fact, that there are other people in the room, namely Tom Hagen and Santino, or Sonny, Don Vito's son. And then going back to the Don himself, we'll see that there is also an animal cat, right? But you can see not only the movements related to the zooming out and the slight panning of the camera, but also you can see the agitation, right? You can see how the head is moving, the body language combined with this kind of agitated and aggressive tone of voice. And now we're zooming out, but there is still a lot of darkness, and clearly we associate darkness with evil, but the film is doing much more than this, right? It would be rather trivial if the choice of darkness were just to represent the evil nature of this exchange, because in fact there is much more, right? It's a real office. So now we're starting to see, while the camera is zooming out, the desk. We've not heard from Don Vito, we have not seen him, but the first thing we see is that he is sitting behind the desk like a lawyer, like a manager, that his way of leading this crime family is expressed in a style that is quite different from Scarface, Little Caesar, or even Capone in other ways. Capone in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is sitting around a table that is long and wide, and it looks like the boardroom of a corporation, but certainly he himself has this imposing physique, and the way he moves around, the aggressive stance of his voice are quite different from here. In here, instead, the paradoxical contrast is between the Undertaker, who wants violence, who demands action, and the Godfather, who's absolutely pulling back with a soft voice, with a thin voice that, of course, is Marlon Brando's choice for the character. Keep in mind that Marlon Brando was, I think, 46 when he played this part, so he's trying to play the part of an older character, and he did different things. Of course, he wanted to change his jaws with prosthesis. He his teeth, and he found a voice and then mannerisms for this character. But look, as we move out and we see more of the context, what we have in front of us are the props that indicate the regular desk of some kind of professional or someone in a managerial position, right? Nothing is missing there. And again, Bonacera is still moving, is still quite agitated, but as we see Don Vito entering the frame, we find his head to be completely still, holding his head with a hand, not being particularly reactive to this. All to give you the impression that this is not the impulsive, instinctual criminal, the naturally inclined to violence criminal that we see in most of the films before this, but rather this is a thinker. This is someone who reflects, who meditates, who doesn't decide on the use of violence lightly, right? Again, slowly but surely, we have more of a dialogue, and as I said, this is one of the lines, "What do you want of me?" Which is ironic, clearly, right? Because the Don is a decider, is clearly a strong leader. This is simply a suggestion to make Amerigo understand that you don't go there demanding a favor. You go there first and foremost to show respect, and then to play the game of exchanging respect for acceptable favors. Right? And the camera stays here. We haven't seen the main character yet. The Undertaker moves in, and notice that it's not even the idea of darkness, symbolic of violence, of the forces of evil that goes back to classical cultures as well as the Bible. At this point is more a visual technique used multiple times in the film, where you're not allowed right away to see what is going on, to have access to an intimate conversation, right? You're placed in the position of an observer who's also an outsider, or at most an intruder into the scene. Whereas most films would take you there, right? Show you, for example, the face of Amerigo in one frame, then the face of the Don in another frame, which is done sometimes during this film, but intentionally in here, you are trying to get into a circle of trust. And the same will happen with the family. A lot of shots in this film are taken from just outside, from the threshold or outside the door of a room, looking into a room, instead of taking you inside, because this way, you yourself as a spectator feel excluded. And therefore you understand that the game for this family, as a biological family or as a crime family, is about inclusion and exclusion. Who's part of the inner circle, who's part of the outer circle, who's out of the family, right? Because you also have the FBI, etc. So there are several circles that go from the biological family of the Corleone to their crime family, to the network of people like the baker, the undertaker, who orbit socially around them, and then the real outsiders. So the idea is to make you experience what it means to be admitted to this kind of intimate conversation or exchange. And so intentionally here, darkness is not representing evil, it's representing exclusion. You don't really know who they are. You are in the dark. meaning you are outside. You don't know enough to form a judgment, but you feel that you are being intentionally excluded. Finally, we see his face, and the windows with partial lights coming in communicate to you another dynamics of inclusion and exclusion. And this time it is the outside of the office, which is the marriage, and the inside, because even during the social rituals of the celebration of the marriage of Connie with all the guests, the music, the dancing, some people, and only some people, are admitted into the inner sanctum of the family, which is the office of the Don. Only Santino, Sonny, as the prospective successor of the Don, and Tom Hagen, the consigliere, are admitted to this conversation, and guests, selected guests, such as the Undertaker, because the requests of favors is customary for this event. Once again, you don't see a character who's highly reactive in here, right? You see him not continuing, not carrying on the conversation, or not even moving to anger and scolding, which he will do, but just shaking his head a bit, ruminating over what he has heard and how to best approach this scene and how to teach a lesson to the Undertaker while maintaining dignity, because in the end it will not be a no, but it will be a no and a lot of preaching by the Godfather saying, you don't do these things to me, you don't treat me like that, this is all wrong, you've got me wrong. Right? Which is the same oblique way that the film has chosen to show you the character, whereas regular films will have a premise such that you understand the background to the protagonist. So you see him moving his head, looking in different directions, scratching his cheeks, which is one of the mannerisms he adopted for Marlon Brando, adopted for the character. You see how many times this is done. And now, before anything else happens, you have a wider shot, showing all the people in the room, Santino by the window, Tom Hagen sitting in a chair, and they themselves are rather still and completely silent. And you understand that there is some kind of ritual that has to be observed for these things, right? So how can you perceive that this is a film about violence? And the gist of my notes that I posted this morning is exactly that. In this film, you don't see anyone in the Corleone family being violent up until Michael kills McCluskey and Solozzo at the restaurant. But even that is not a light decision, an easy decision. It is discussed, objected to, and then executed with input from Tom Hagen, from Sonny, from Clemenza himself. So, wider shot, and now, through the partial darkness, you see more of the props that make this the office of a wealthy citizen, right, who is in some way or form a leader of an extended community. And as I said before, then this time when you go to a close-up of the exchange, go back to placing in the frame just the two characters who are having a dialogue, the Don and the Undertaker, you find the cat. And this is an incredible intuition. It wasn't planned from the beginning. Of course, you find thousands of videos about the making of The Godfather, but this was just a cat that was present in the studios, and it was the director Francis Ford Coppola's decision to pick the cat, give it to Marlon Brando, who was kind of surprised, and saying, asking, of course, the director, what do I do with it? And the director said, just go with it. Just do whatever you think it's appropriate. And of course, you understand the significance of Don Vito stroking the cat during a scene where violence is being requested to be inflicted to the perpetrators of this abuse against the Undertaker's daughter, right? Because you find someone who's apparently a regular individual with a family, with a pet, and not someone who would be naturally inclined to use violence, like, for example, McCloskey himself, the police captain, who will really deliver a punch to Michael, right? And of course, it's easy also to see the connection, right, between this violence described by the Undertaker and the violence that Michael himself will be subjected to by McCloskey, right? The physical violence, the violence that remains visible, impressed on your body, right? And again, this time it is the Undertaker who's staying still and the Dom getting more agitated. Now is moved, the actor is progressed from the stillness of the initial frames to a slightly more agitated set of movements, but still controlled. It's still a limited range of physical movements. And the voice itself, as you will hear, reflects that, right? The shot, the camera remains on them for a while, then it goes back to give you visual evidence of the failed attempt by Amerigo to dominate the situation, to control the situation and demand, set exactly what is expected from the Dom, right? And alternating with shots showing more reactions as this is moving to its conclusion, first with the lecture given by Don Vito to Amerigo, but again, notice the props that show domesticity, right? While this is going on, you just see a plant with a ceramic vase, for example. And of course, throughout the whole scene, you see the way Vito, is dressed elegantly, formally, in a rather proper fashion as the father of the bride, with the flower on the lapel of his jacket, with his bow tie, right? This is, now that we have the lecture, it's more appropriate for the actor, for the character to be standing and to be towering over Amerigo, who's not as tall as Marlon Brando, right? Because Amerigo is being scolded about his behavior, and the mannerism of the pointed finger emphasizes this, while you see also the characters in the background, and you cannot fail to notice that Santino, Tom Hagen is amused, Santino is bored, right? So he's not really the kind of leader you expect to succeed such a charismatic individual, one with such nuanced mastership or mastery of communication as Don Vito is. And finally you see Bonacera bowing his head profusely, using the proper language, the proper formulae, being escorted outside, being presented with a smile by the Godfather, who will not proceed to enact any violence, but in a managerial style, he will delegate the execution of the punishment through Tom Hagen to Clemenza, and this is a reference to the various levels that separate him from the actual violence. So you know from the beginning that although this film is about violent characters, that violence plays quite a different role. And of course in here you have not one but two flowers, right? The gardenia on Tom Hagen's jacket and the red rose on Don Vito's jacket. And then of course you move out. And you move out to show the different circles, right? So you've seen the inner circle of the family, Don Vito and his son, the circle of the mafia family through Tom Hagen and the reference to Clemenza. Here you see the circle of the immediate community, the relatives, the other relatives, and the whole community. Of course, you find a reference to the absence of Michael. And then you see the outer circle. Who is out? For example, the photographers and the FBI, and actually the photographers are working for the FBI, taking pictures of the license plates. Going back, notice that I kept this frame, which is one of many, during the feast, during the marriage party, where you see characters moving in front of the camera, which officially, normally is a big no-no, right? And normally the director would shoot in such a way that you would see the people, but no one would be blocking the image. By having this kind of approach, with people moving in front of the camera, you yourself are immersed in the marriage party like an outsider or an intruder. You're not admitted into the bond, the relationship between the characters who are celebrating the bride, and this will be repeated several times. Okay, so this was my introduction, and so the next step will be, we'll watch together the whole sequence until Tom Hagen flies to Los Angeles, which is the official ending of the initial sequence. Tom Hagen will have to go talk to the producer who's supposed to give a role to Johnny Fontaine. So we'll just see the parts that are shot in the office of the Godfather, outside with the various guests, and of course, as I said, the purpose of this is for you then to engage in an activity today and Thursday to pin down some of the details. So start putting down some notes about details, knowing that later for this activity you can go back to the frames themselves to observe anything you put down more closely.